Welcome to Module 4. Today we're going to be talking about and actually practicing the ACEs, the urban ACEs, and then we're going to talk about maladaptive coping that is related to that. In particular, outcomes of our health. Now, you may find this segment really helpful, actually for you, as a teacher, a therapist, a caregiver, whoever you are listening to this. These are important things that we would need to understand about ourselves and how they impact our own lives. Let's jump in. As we've discussed previously, ACEs is 10 questions that was designed by Kaiser Permanente and the CDC, and they're really yes or no issues. I'm hoping that by now that you have taken the assessments and so that you know what your score is and that you've read those questions. If you haven't, you can find them on the Padlet, and I do invite you to go ahead and take those assessments, put this on pause right now, take those for yourself before we continue. Here are the 10 ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. So these are things that happen before the age of 18, and they're measured with some specific questions, and let's review what those 10 things are. The first question is, did you live with a family member who was depressed or diagnosed with another mental illness, or someone who actually tried to take their own life? So with this one, it's a yes or a no, and people will ask, well, my parent was never diagnosed, or my caregiver was never diagnosed with something. And that doesn't matter. You know if you lived with someone who suffered from mental illness. And so if that is true, then the correct answer there would be yes. Sexual abuse is the next question, and they're going to ask specifically before the age of 18 if that happened. And so that again is a simple yes or no answer. You know inside of yourself, and people know, and the question, of course, asks in detail about what that might look like. Then it moves to verbal abuse. So this is in a household or a setting where there isn't necessarily physical abuse. It can be combined with that, but this is just about people putting you down, making jokes at your expense, being mean to you, you being afraid that you might actually be harmed. The next question is about physical neglect, followed by a question about emotional neglect. And so this is really trying to suss out and measure how these things might have impacted you in terms of neglect, absent the other topics. It then asks a question about physical abuse. Did you actually experience domestic violence in your home? Were you afraid? Those kinds of things. They're very simple questions. They're not outlined, but they're very clear. And again, it is a simple yes or no. And people will say to me, well, gosh, Jamie, how do I know if it could be categorized as that? And what I say to them is, you know, if you look into your heart and you just sit quietly for a moment and you're honest about what you know is true, then that is the way to assess whether this is a yes or a no for you. And it could have been one time. A trauma can happen one time in one event, so it doesn't have to be ongoing. The next question is about family members who are using or dependent on drugs or alcohol. So that asks a very straightforward question about that. The next question is, did a family member go to prison? Now with this question, I have changed it up, and also Urban ACEs changes it up to include jail. So it's often a misnomer, and doctors did this so they don't understand the difference between prison and jail, both having the same impact on children, the parent being removed from the home and the parent being away, and the impact of all of that, the court system, etc. So if it was prison or jail, both of those would be a yes answer. Witnessing a mother being abused. Now, again, this assessment, when it was created, we didn't know quite so much about domestic violence. And what we know now is that a father can be being abused, a caretaker who lives in the home, a grandmother, a grandfather. And the question is, really, did I witness one of my family members, a brother or sister, etc., a sibling, being abused? And lastly, did I lose a parent to separation, divorce, or death? With this question, people will ask me, well, Jamie, my parents were only separated for a month. Does that count? Yes, it does. Well, my dad left, but he came back after a year. That's a separation. my father or mother or parent or caregiver or somebody that was caring for me in the household was separated from me for any variety of reasons. That might have been them going to a rehab. They weren't home with you, providing that parental modality, that care, that caregiver's presence in the home. And so that would be considered a separation. Certainly a divorce and a death is very clear cut. So what I'm going to invite you to do with this is to actually take these 10 questions, and you have them on the ACEs assessment in the Padlet, and spend some time with them. I can, if you write to me, send you some little note cards that we made for memorization, but you could even just take this slide and cut these out and think about that. Why is it so important that we have these questions in our mind? Because we want to train ourselves to be listening for these kind of clues. For example, someone might say, when my father went to jail, that's one. When my parents became separated, or when my father left for 2 years, or my mother or my caregiver or whomever that was, 2. Now, in the case of foster care kids, these separations can be multiple. It can be that they were actually separated and taken away from that family and put into a different family where they lost connection with those caregivers in the foster care setting that they were actually in. So these are the things I'm listening for, and this is what I've really been working our way up to. When people are talking to me, I can really hear them telling me their story. You know, when I was going to school, I didn't have proper shoes, and that was really hard on me. It would be an example of something that someone might say. That might be physical neglect, not having proper clothing or food or access to care in a way that people need in order to thrive. So we're not going to spend more time with this one on this video. What I am going to do is invite you to pause the video, go find the assessment again, if you haven't already, on the Padlet. It's very clearly marked on the Padlet. And I'm going to invite you to print that out or even make notes on a paper about what these 10 things are. So you can start to cement them and build some muscle memory, some neuroconnectors for yourself. And we want to change our listening processes when we're listening to someone talking about themselves. What am I hearing? And what is it that they're actually telling me that happened to them? The next piece we want to look at is the Philadelphia Expanded ACE questions. And this was really developed in response to communities of BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous, people of color, who said, yes, ACEs is really valuable. And it was taken by thousands of people who were mostly white and lived in mostly middle-class areas. And they didn't experience some of the same things that we experience in our communities of color or more poor and impoverished neighborhoods. So this was developed for that, to add additional evidence-based, being inclusive of race, ethnicity, and different lived experiences, including poverty, around what someone might witness that would be an additional ACE that we could count. So the first one is witnessing violence. So the question is, how often, if ever, did you see or hear someone being beaten up, stabbed, or shot in real life? With this one, this brings us to a place, and having been raised in Ventura County and gone to school in South Oxnard, these were actually things that I witnessed in my school. Not in my home. We lived in Camarillo. Not in my neighborhood in Camarillo, which was predominantly, if not all white. But when I was in South Oxnard going to Ocean View Junior High School, these things did happen at that school, and they had a profound impact on me. The second piece is, did you ever feel discrimination? So while you were growing up, how often did you feel that you were treated badly or unfairly because of your race or ethnicity? I want to add to this very important piece, because we're going to talk about intersectionality and how that is something that impacts people at the same time. So it's not just that you may be a girl. It may be that you're a girl and you're a Black girl. It may not be that you're a boy, but it might be that you're a trans boy. So we want to really address this. Did this person feel discrimination? So let's add to that when we think about abilities, when we think about LGBTQIAS2 folks, when we think about gender diversity, we want to acknowledge if someone felt discrimination. And again, this is going to be very personal. It could have been because of a lot of factors. So we don't want to get wed to the definition. We want to be able to be inclusive so that if someone felt discrimination based on a multitude of things, then it was there. It may have been something that was fat shaming or where someone had a disability, whether it's seen or unseen. So again, very personal about how I perceive what's happening. Did I experience an adverse neighborhood experience? Did you feel safe in your neighborhood? Did you feel that people in your neighborhood looked out for each other, stood up for each other, and could be trusted? Were you bullied? How often were you bullied by a peer or a classmate? So again, this just isn't about race. This can be about a multitude of things. So we know, especially right now, that LGBTQIS2 children are being bullied more than ever. And so this is where we want to be inclusive and ask those questions so that we get the appropriate responses around that. Were you bullied because of the color of your skin, the way that your religion dictates that you wear your hair, the clothes that you wore because they were related to your culture or religion? It can be a lot of reasons. And did you ever live in foster care? Yes, they have included this in the urban ACEs. So they've asked this question, and this is an important one for us to add. There are more questions on the urban ACEs, and you will find that in your resources in the Padlet. And I invite you to read through that and really take time with those things. And let's not get wed to just these 10 questions. That's it. It's a great starting point, but there's more to people's very complex and complicated stories. I invite you now to turn the video off, to go and find the Urban ACEs, to take a look at that, to print it out, and spend a little bit of time looking at that so that you're familiar with what people other than people who are predominantly white, raised in a middle class urban area with access to things may have experienced. More things could have happened. And if you hear yourself come up in your mind, what about this? This would have been really traumatizing, or this could be very traumatizing. Trust yourself in that. It's fair for you to add that thing, whatever that thing is, because we want to be inclusive and recognize that people have different experiences. Why is this so important? Well, we've looked at this in part over and over again, and what I want to show you here and add to that layering now is that really this has a cumulative impact. So the higher our numbers on our ACEs, the higher chance, I'm going to stress this again, it doesn't mean it will happen. It means absent help, that there is a good chance that these things will happen. Kaiser Permanente found that the sickest people at Kaiser, the people who took up the most resources from medicine, were people who were the most severely traumatized. We know that that is true. So we've got this little example here on this slide that's helpful to see. So it starts out with eating disorders, self-injury. These are all potential outcomes. Repetition of original trauma, which we've discussed. Someone having 50 plus sex partners. We talked about that. We talked about the reality of what we call loose girls, and that there are books that you can read about that. And there's a book about loose boys as well, and why that may happen. What are they looking for? A person who uses drugs or alcoholism, a person who attempts to take their life, severe obesity, and smoking. So what we know is that as our number increases, the risk for these things increases exponentially. And lots of data about that, again, on your Padlet to take a look at. This is personal to me. I've struggled throughout my life with smoking. I have been severely obese, and that is taken care of now. I have never attempted to take my own life. I have been very careful with alcohol, understanding the reality of this. So I have not been a drug user in the way that is considered abuse. I did tamper with things in high school, that is for sure. I'm not a person who has had multiplicity of sex partners. I think in large part, though, that comes from my upbringing and because my parents were really on top of me all the time. I don't know how that might have looked different had I been raised with different caregivers. A repetition of the original trauma? Yes, I've done that. My mother has got a personality disorder, and I found earlier in my life that I was attracted to people relationally, whether friends or partners, who had that same and similar cluster B personality disorder. And I've done a tremendous amount of work around this with lots of therapy, lots of seminars, and am on the other side of that now. And I recognize it as a danger for myself. I know the signs because what happens inside of us is that our central nervous system gets activated in a way that feels familiar when we're around those same kinds of people. Self-injury, that's not been something that I've done. Lots of friends who have done that and are on the other side of that as well. And so much information for you to look at in terms of kids who cut and why that might be, or other ways that they would self-injure. And then eating disorders. I know I have an eating disorder. I'm addicted to food and sugar. It's what led me to being severely obese, and I work on it every day. I'm part of a program. I have a supportive system around me, in my case, which is Weight Watchers, that I still, after 9 years, weigh myself every day, pay attention to what I'm eating, and I'm very healthy, but I don't deceive myself into thinking that this isn't still there. It's hardwired, and so I have now the skills and the techniques to do better with that and being successful. But what I know is true is I need to pay attention to these things because it's really important that I am aware. This is only a partial list, and there's in your Padlet, what you'll find is a handout that says, now that I have my ACEs score, now what? And it has lots of graphs and grids. You can go on CDC and just Google this. You can Google it on Kaiser Permanente's website, kp.org. And in there, you will find all kinds of graphs and grids that measure how people like myself who have high ACEs scores, and that is anyone with a score of over 4, the opportunity for these things to happen if we don't intervene and do something about it goes up. And trauma is cumulative. So very important for us to understand these outcomes and where they come from. When we think about maladaptive coping and what that is, and we look at this, we know that a child has had adversity, and we can see that in the classrooms. We can see because behaviorally, whether they are acting out or turning inwards and shutting down or something in between, we are being a witness to that, and that child has had and experienced adversity. This does actually link to high-risk behaviors. So my master's thesis was about finding family, and I tied it and studied and looked at gangs that were in Oxnard, California, and compared gangs and interviewed the gang members and talked to them about why they were in gangs. And almost 95% of the children in the gangs told me that they were there because they felt wanted and loved, and they felt protected and safe. There's some irony here. And they weren't getting those needs met at home. So they were willing to engage in high-risk behavior in order to have that familial association so that they could feel like they were cared for because they weren't getting it in their own homes. That's just one example. This can also lead to disease, disability, and social problems. And finally, one of the truths that Dr. Burke Harris talked about is that a person with a score of above 4, we know, has an average lifespan of 20 years less. Now, that was a mind-blowing statistic to me the first time I heard it. I want to live a long, happy life. and be healthy and happy and love my life and experience great joy. So when I found that out, what I also figured out from listening to these experts was that that's not a guarantee. It's a guarantee if we don't intervene and do something different around that and change up the things that can harm us. And that means changing behavior. It's not enough to know that we need to actually do something different. We have to do that different thing. So when I learned this, I made massive changes. I changed my friendship base. I changed relationships. I did a lot of things, and I did a lot of things around my personal health and started taking way better care with myself. I'm not going to let this get me 20 years before I'm due. So I invite you to think about this piece again. I hope you've heard me clearly. This isn't a death sentence. To me, this is information that's so powerful that says I get to choose. I get to choose to take care of myself now and get the help that I need to care for myself, to limit my stress, to really make sure I have enough time for myself. And that is what will ensure that we can live healthy, happy, and joy-filled lives. That's what we want for everyone. When we think about this, again, this is a study in the United States of America, the average lifespan, 20 years less, I just talked about that. For a person who reports between 4 and 8 ACEs, we know that 1 in 6 is a smoker, that 1 in 6 is an alcoholic, 1 in 30 uses IV drugs, 1 in 6 has heart disease, 1 in 5 attempts suicide during their lifetime. I want to compare this now with a person who reports no ACEs. 96, 5. 1 in 5 versus 1 in 96. The science tells us that it's true. So what we want is to actually help people understand that they are not at fault for their trauma. What they are is responsible for changing their thought patterns, changing their life, and doing the things in support of their physical body and mental self so that they can live their best life. Now, we've talked about resiliency factors, and this is, I hope you already took this, and if you don't, I invite you to pause the video right now if you didn't have time to go there and take that now. I've told lots of stories, Miss Hoffman, Miss Burke, Mr. Sussman, different people in my life who were resiliency factors for me. My grandmother is another person. And what are those? So there's here another list, and these are things that I have in my mind that I'm listening for in conversations. What is this person doing in their life, and what do they have in their life where people are caring about them so that they can then have resiliency? I mean, personally, I don't want to have to get back up because I don't want to get knocked down in the first place. But my resiliency allows me to do that, to get back up and then to do something different. Not to get back up and go do the same thing, to do something different in my life so I can change those outcomes. Let's review those. The questions are, did I have close relationships with a competent caregiver or caregivers and other caring adults? Was there parental resilience? Did my parents demonstrate that for me? And parents used loosely, caregivers, foster care parents, grandparents raising children, whoever it is in the home that's caring for that child, did they demonstrate what resiliency looks like? Did the caregiver have knowledge of positive parenting skills? Was I able to identify and cultivate a sense of purpose? This could be in faith or culture or identity. It can be really vast. For me, it was sports. Sports were the thing. I swam, I played baseball, I played basketball, I played soccer, and that gave me a sense of purpose and also created communities for me that were healthy, in healthy environments, being around caregivers, those coaches who were really caring human beings. Was there individual development competencies like problem-solving skills? Did I get taught self-regulation? How to self-regulate in a moment where I might be activated? And was I given agency over my decisions? Was there someone there who asked, what do you think? What do you care about? What do you want in this situation? And then, was there social and emotional health around me as a child? Did I have good social connections with other humans, whether they are kids or adults who were positive social connections? What about socioeconomic advantages and concrete support for parents, caregivers, and my family? And then finally, was my community and was that social system that I had, did it support health and development so that I could actually be nurtured to enliven my own human capital, to become the best version of myself that I could possibly be, which is what we want for folks. So these are things I'm listening for, amongst other things. Resiliency is individual. Again, what provides resiliency for a person is very personal, but this is what I'm listening for in the background. And then as an educator, I want to identify who are those people. And they may not be the people that we would normally think about in terms of that. In the LGBTQ community, we have what is called house mothers and house fathers. These are people, and it looks a little different today than it did in the 80s, but these are people who take under the wings and really coach and help little queer kids to actually have a life where they are seen and valued and cared for. So it may not be the traditional person that you're thinking of. It might be a minister. It might be a rabbi. It might be a coach. It might be myriad people around, but identifying those people and listening for who that is. Who is it that you feel safest around? Who is the person where you feel the best about yourself when you're around them? Who is the person who gives you the most hope? Who is the person who helps you with XYZ? So these are the resiliency factors. Again, this is from Kaiser Permanente, and I invite you to take a look at those because they should always be a part of the conversation and part of our listening when we're with other human beings in whatever setting. So the link for this is green. You've been there before. I invite you to go back to the green Padlet link. I hope that you are able to pull this up on a big screen, really utilize these resources, and go through those and take some time and look at what you might want, need, or think is a good resource. There are videos also to watch. Of course, that's up to you if you want to take it to the next learning level. And for the next module, which is module 5, which is actually kids in foster care, unstable housing, and lived experience, we're going to bring in Lizzie. And Lizzie is going to talk about her experience growing up in Ventura County and being in foster care, what that looked like for her and how she ended up thriving. Lizzie is doing so well today, going to university. She is a mother of 2 beautiful children, and she is doing quite well in her life. And she's going to talk about how that looked for her. And I look forward to sharing that interview with you in our next section. The color for that will be purple. And so when you go there, if you want to look ahead, you can look ahead at those resources that we have. It's been a pleasure spending time with you. Again, the resources are on the screen for foster youth services coordinating and homeless education programs. I encourage you to reach out if you want further information from them. They're the people sponsoring this training. I look forward to seeing you next time. Take good care.